So, welcome to a new session of Indian fiction in English. Today, we are looking at the novel Indulekha within the context of the rise of novel in regional languages in India. So, Indulekha is a Malayalam novel. It was written by O. Chandu Menon in the year 1889. Now, Chandu Menon was a sub-judge of Calicut, and he was also a member of the Malabar Marriage Commission instituted in 1891 by the British government of Madras Presidency, in order to look into the changes that could be brought about in the matrilineal structure that was matrilineal system that was practiced by the Nayar community, the form of marriage called sambandham and their inheritance system. Now, Indulekha is Menon's first novel, and it is also considered to be the first finest novel written in the language. Now, he has also written another novel called Sharada. However, he could not complete it. So, he wrote these two works. Now, Indulekha was translated into English in 1890 by W. Dumarc. He was a British civil servant. This was a very popular novel and was widely read. It was very successful that within 3 months of its publication, the second edition was brought out, and it also set a trend for Malayalam novels with female protagonists. It was not only appreciated by readers, it was considered by literary critics also to be the first finest novel in Malayalam, because chronologically speaking, Indulekha was only the second novel. It was Kundalatha written by Appu Nedungadi, that was the first Malayalam novel. However, by the literary merits such as realistic treatment of plot, the characterization, the brilliance of characterization by Menon, Indulekha is still considered to be the first novel written in the language. So, there is an interesting anecdote behind the writing of the novel Indulekha. Menon was a very avid reader of English novels. He loved reading English novels. He would often narrate these novels for his wife and his friends. So, it occurred to him that why not translate one of these novels into Malayalam. And he initially set out to translate Benjamin Disraeli's Henrietta Temple into Malayalam. He felt that this novel, if it was translated into Malayalam, would not be relatable to Malayali readers. Therefore, he dropped this idea and therefore decided to write an original work in Malayalam which would be set in the region, and that is how Indulekha was written. And this novel is set in the late 19th century Kerala, one of the most decisive phase in the history of Kerala. It was the period of colonial modernity, and it realistically captures this particular time period and particularly the Nayar community. Therefore, this work is also considered to be the first social novel as well as the first realist novel written in the language. Now, while talking about the novel, we will have to look into some of the key aspects regarding the novel. First of all, the novel is set in the matrilineal family, the Nayar family, and it captures the life inside this familial space. Now, to talk about the matrilineal structure, matrilineal is a kinship system in which you trace the descent of the family through the female line. So, they lived as joint families which were called Tharavad. Each Tharavad is headed by the eldest male member called the Karnavar, and they practiced a form of marriage called sambandham, in which there is no legal validity to the relationship between the husband and the wife, and it is not even considered as a ritual marriage. So, there is no obligation for the husband towards his wife and children. They remain within the woman's Tharavad, and the father figure is not even present. He is just a visiting member, and they could absolve this sambandham relation as and when they pleased. So, the importance of this sambandham practice within the context of matrilineal is that the property remains consolidated within the joint family. So, it is this particular situation or this particular family structure and its functioning that is captured in Indulekha, along with which the novel also anticipates the shift from this matrilineal joint family to a patrilineal nuclear family structure, because as I mentioned, this is a period of colonial modernity, a phase in which a series of reform movements were taking place. There were community reform movements in various caste groups. So, in the context of Nayar community, the educated younger male members, they started raising their voice of dissent against the authoritarian figure of the Karnavar, and this created rupture in the Tharavad. The entire novel is presented in the point of view of the English educated man who questions the seemingly uncivilized traditional practices from his perspective. And more significantly, this novel espouses the cause of female education. Now, let's have a quick look at the summary of the novel. We will be looking only at the major storyline, and I'll only mention some of the major or significant characters instead of going into a detailed summary of the novel. Now, the protagonist of the novel is Indulekha. She is 18-year-old and she belongs to a very aristocratic Nayar Tharavad called the Chambariyot Puvali Tharavad, and she is an English educated girl. Indulekha's father belonged to a royal family. He was a king of Kilimanur house, but when she was very young he passed away. So, the educational matters of Indulekha was looked after by one of her uncles, and he was very insistent that Indulekha was given English education, and he also made it a point that she was brought up just like a refined English lady. So, she was not only given English education, she was also trained in skills like embroidery, painting, in playing musical instruments like veena, violin, piano, etc. So, this very so Indulekha is modelled as an English lady. Now, Indulekha is the granddaughter of the carnivore of this family, who is Panchamenon. Panchamenon is a very steadfast, short-tempered old man, and everybody in the family is afraid of him. Nobody even dares to speak right in front of him. And Indulekha is in love with Madhavan. Madhavan is Panchamenon's grandnephew. He is also English educated. He excelled in all his studies. He is well versed in English and Sanskrit. He is also a law graduate and extremely good looking. So, everybody in the family knows that Indulekha and Madhavan love each other. However, as the novel opens, there is a crisis. Madhavan and Panchamenon has a fallout. Madhavan goes against the decisions of Panchamenon. He denies education to one of his nephews who belongs to a lower line of the family. So, Madhavan questions this decision and he decides to give education to this particular cousin of him. So, this creates a fallout between Panchamenon and Madhavan, and as a result he decides against the union of Indulekha and Madhavan. Meanwhile, Madhavan completes his examination. He passes his law examination and he moves to Madras for a job. It is in this brief moment when Madhavan is away from this Tharavad that Panchamenon brings another proposal for Indulekha with a very wealthy Nambudiri man called Surya Nambudripad. However, Surya Nambudripad is an octogenarian and he is a libertine. He has sambandham with several women of the Nayar families in that region, and he has come to know about the beauty of Indulekha and is all set to win her mind. However, Indulekha, because she is educated, she is smart and intelligent, is able to decline this proposal very politely, because once they both get an opportunity to have a conversation, and during this conversation Indulekha is able to ridicule this Nambudripad, and he is absolutely humiliated. So, he realizes that he will not be able to win Indulekha, but to save his face and grace, he decides to marry a much younger member of the family called Kalyanikutti, who is just 13 years old. So, nobody even asks her opinion. She is forced into a sambandham with this Nambudripad. However, he spreads a rumor that he in fact married Indulekha. So, meanwhile, Madhavan comes back to Malabar. However, he also comes to know about this rumor, but he does not wait to clarify the truth of the matter. He goes back to Madras, and upon the advice from his senior officer, he embarks on a tour of the country. And people back in Tharavad, they are a little worried and they go in search of Madhavan. Meanwhile, Madhavan goes to Bombay, then he has a short stay in Calcutta. He makes friends with two men of Bhadralok community over there, and he has a little misfortune during a train journey where he is robbed of his materials. Finally, he gets all his things back with the help of his friends, and his father and one of Indulekha's uncles, they meet him in Bombay. They clarify all these confusions and misunderstandings and brings him back, and thus all the confusions are cleared. Madhavan and Indulekha, they reunite, and eventually it is reported to us towards the end of the novel by the author himself that they have a happy family in Madras, and they also have 2 kids and they live happily ever after. So, this is a very pleasing love story at the outset, but the significance of Indulekha is not merely because it was the first novel in Malayalam. It is also on the grounds of its realistic depiction of that contemporary society. in Realism and Reality, Meenakshi Mukherjee talks about 3 strands of novels, out of which the first one is the novel of purpose, which is written with an intent of social reform or for missionary activities. The second strand is the one where there is a commingling of the historical and the supernatural. And the third strand of novel is the one which is written to render the contemporary society realistically. So, Indulekha is categorized by Mukherjee in this third strand of novel. And based on the preface written by Chandu Menon for this novel, she points out the 2 objectives of Indulekha. So, Menon states, "My objective is to write a novel after the English fashion. It is evident that no ordinary Malayali lady can fill the role of the heroine in such a story. My Indulekha is not therefore an ordinary Malayali lady." And he also continues to state this, that my narrative of love and courtship of Madhavan is intended to show the young ladies of Malabar how happy they can be if they can have the freedom to choose their partners. So, from this preface, Meenakshi Mukherjee points out these 2 objectives. First one is the introduction of a new literary form into Malayalam, because a realistic narrative form was not there. It was mostly poetic and highly Sanskritized forms of writings that was available till then. So, this novel was one of the first attempts, successful attempts at introducing a new literary form, that too of Western style. And this novel succeeds in it. And the second objective is to show the necessity of English education, especially for women. Talking about the importance of education given in the novel, all the characters in this novel are presented based on their attitude and their response towards the system of English education that is introduced in the land. Now, the novelist also has a clear intention of emphasizing the need for women to be educated in English. The power of education is such that one imbibes a whole new system of values and self-confidence. For instance, take the case of the conversation between Indulekha and Surya Namboodiripad. She is very intelligent, and it is because of her intelligence and smartness that she is able to decline the proposal of sambandham from this octogenarian. And after this conversation, this is what Surya Namboodiripad talks about or opines about Indulekha. Indulekha is like the English in her manners. How insolent she is, her speech and manner are not proper. She talked to me as she would to an equal. Now, juxtapose this with the comment made about Kalyani Kuti, the 13-year-old girl with whom Surya Namboodiripad has the sambandham. This is the remark by another character in the novel. She doesn't know any English. Everyone says that she is good-natured. So, there is a clear contrast that is made between one who is educated and one who is not. See how bold, confident and a strong personality that Indulekha is. On the other hand, the author presents Kalyani Kuti as a muted figure. She is even likened to a sacrificial animal in the novel. So, Madhavan, Indulekha and all other characters who favor or who are in support of English education are presented as sensible and rational characters in the novel. On the other hand, characters like Panchu Menon, Surya Namboodiripad and the sambandham partner of Indulekha's mother, Keshavan Nambudiri, these characters, those who denounce English education, are depicted as dim-wits and comical. So, go back to the point of realistic narrative technique that was introduced through the form of novel into the language. So, the narrative technique is realistic, yes, but the characterization was not realistic, it was either idealistic, say in the case of characterization of Indulekha or Madhavan, or on the other hand it was very caricaturist as in the case of Surya Namboodiripad. And this kind of clear categorization of characters is done on the basis of their opinion about English education. On the one hand, there are people who support English education and the benefits that it brings in. On the other hand, people who are not able to understand the value of education consider that English education makes the younger generation arrogant, rude, and they do not even know how to behave with their elders. And therefore, they are depicted as dim-wits and comical. Now, this power of education results in the voice of dissent being heard in the Tarawad. For example, take the case of Madhavan. He is the educated Nayar man and he questions the practice of sambandham and he even accuses Nayar women as arrogant. In this context, at this point, Madhavan stands as the one who is English educated and one who has imbibed the Western sense of morality. So, it is from that point that he questions the practice of sambandham. On the other hand, consider the case of Indulekha. She defends the practice of sambandham and Nayar women. So she says, it is when women are not free and are raised like caged animals that they are likely to become adulterous, and that this freedom, that is the freedom to choose husbands, is remarkably commendable. This freedom is missing even in Europe. So here we have to make one clarification clear, that Chandu Menon, the author, he is not against the practice of sambandham. In fact, what he tries to put forth in this novel is that women should have the freedom to choose their partners. So even when the practice of sambandham gave women to have the freedom to have multiple partners in their lifetime, it was mostly the Tarawad which decided to whom the woman should get married. Here he has a strong opinion against it, and he says one should choose the partners based on their emotion of love and not because you are obliged to follow the rules or the decisions made by the Tarawad or the Karnavar. So here he is not against the practice of sambandham, and that is why this argument or this discussion between Madhavan and Indulekha becomes significant in the novel. Also, both these characters, Indulekha and Madhavan, they are present as representatives of modern educated Malayali, and as the author himself states in the preface, she is not an ordinary lady, and no ordinary lady could have filled this role. She is fashioned like an English lady or the protagonist of English novels. So there is no realism here, it is an idealistic representation, and what he intends is that these characters should remain as models for Malayali readers, so that they can also reform themselves into and fashion themselves into modern educated selves. And even while doing this, he is also attempting to strike a balance between tradition and modernity. For instance, take the case of the physical appearance of Indulekha and Madhavan. They are very much true to their tradition. Physically, she is very much traditional in her appearance, but the outlook is very much modern, and it is shaped by Western values of individualism and morality. This is applicable to the case of Madhavan too. He is also traditional in his attire. You find him wearing clothes like a English gentleman during the tour of the country. Otherwise, he is also in his appearance very much like a traditional Nayar man, but even his approach and outlook towards the world is very much shaped by Western values. Another major aspect that we need to look into in the context of this novel is the absence of the nation, or if at all there is the presence of nation, the minimalist representation of it. Now this is one significant aspect that we have to understand in the context of regional novels. Unlike English novels where nation comes as a major preoccupation, it was of minor significance in regional novels. It was mostly issues related to caste or matters of regional importance that were given more importance in writing novels in the regional languages, or it might be the emphasis is more on matters of social reform or missionary activities, or even the realistic portrayal of the contemporary society, and not an idealistic vision of a modern Indian nation. It is when Madhavan embarks on a journey upon the advice from his senior officer that we get to see India, or the colonial India during the time period. There is a brief stay that he has in Calcutta, from which we get to see the Bhadralok men of Calcutta, and even the representation of Calcutta is as a wealthy colonial city, and there is a description of Bombay port and the motley of people he sees there. A kind of like a cosmopolitan image of Bombay is represented, and there is also an incident when he is robbed during a train journey by a Muslim impostor who pretends to be a sub-judge of Allahabad, and the author here reminds us that this incident happens outside of the British Raj, or outside of British colonial India. So throughout the novel, the author's ideology and his standpoint are very clear. He is a strong supporter of English education as well as of the English rule in India, and this opinion of his comes across or comes out in the chapter which is very controversial too, which is the 18th chapter, because according to the opinions of the literary critics, this is the single chapter that is considered to be a serious blemish in an otherwise perfect novel. It disrupts the flow of the narrative. This chapter is titled A Conversation, and is just a conversation that Madhavan has with his father and Indulekha's uncle, who goes in search of him. So this conversation takes place in Bombay, that is outside of the matrilineal familial space, and this conversation has got nothing to do with the plot development at all. and they talk about a wide ranging topics such as religion, science, rationality, the different strands of philosophical thoughts that exist, philosophical branches that exist in India, the Indian National Congress, the English government, and the superiority of the English language. And in this chapter, we get to know the opinions of Madhavan, the reformed, modern, educated Nayar man, and he states that he is in favor of the English rule because it was the English government and English administration that brought about some sort of unity in the land, and it is through this British administration that modernity, the nation was steered towards modernity. And he is also in high favor of English language and espouses the merits of English language. So, this is how nation, if at all it makes a presence in the novel, takes place, and has got nothing much to do with the contemporary Malayali society that is being represented in the novel. So, to sum up, yes, Indulekha's significance is not only because it was the first novel or the first finest novel written in the language, it is also because it introduced a new literary form, the novel, into the language, and it discussed topical issues. Therefore, it is not only in the Malayalam literary canon that this novel gained significance. In the larger context of Indian writings or Indian literature too, Indulekha is considered to be a significant work because it captures a time period, the late 19th, early 20th century time period, which was very decisive throughout the country by means of social reform and the steering towards modernity of the country as such. And we find that through the various characters, all are trying to grapple with this newly introduced modernity and its ideals. On one hand, you have characters like Indulekha and Madhavan who have already imbibed and inhabited this modernity, and on the other hand, there are also characters like who are trying to understand and relate their condition with the newly introduced values and belief system. And this novel kind of anticipates the Malabar marriage bill, which was soon to introduce changes in the form of sambandham, because as you see as the novel climaxes, there is a shift from matrilineal to patrilineal nuclear family structure, because you find the lead characters Madhavan and Indulekha moving out of this matrilineal family space and they move towards a urban space, an urban modern space, and they settle there. So, the story concludes, the novel concludes in the anticipating a change from the traditional to a modern social structure, and it also anticipates the reform that was to take place in Nayar community in the coming decades, and it also tells us about how the decline of Tarawad and matrilineal system were brought in by the colonial modernity and the changes that it brought in its wake. One minor issue that we have to address regarding the novel is the absence of references to any other caste other than the Nayar and the Nambudiri communities in Malabar. There are no references to any of the lower caste, no serious references to Christians or Muslims of the region, and in that sense, yes, even though we admit that it is a realistic novel and a social document, it is an incomplete realistic portrayal of the society. So, that is also to be kept in mind, significance of Indulekha as one of the earliest attempts at writing a realist novel and introducing the Western form into regional languages. So, thank you.